So, hi everyone. Good to see you this morning. Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Water Innovation Network Science Talk webinar series. Today we are continuing through Research Thrust A with a presentation from Dr. Elizabeth Mack at Michigan State University. Please be sure to tune in next week, and we're going to shift gears a little bit to focus on the Energy Water Urban Nexus with Project A24 by Dr. Forrest Meggers at Princeton University. As you all probably know, we are recording these webinars and posting them to our YouTube channel and UN website. I'll be sure to drop that link in the chat queue so you can access that information. As a reminder, everyone should be entered in the webinar is muted. So please enter your questions in the chat queue. I'm going to keep an eye on those throughout the presentation. And at the end of Dr. Mack's webinar, we'll go ahead and open it up for some discussions. So with that, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Mack, Associate Professor in the Department of Geography at Michigan State University, where she teaches courses in economic geography. Dr. Mack's research program evaluates the impact of emerging technologies on the development trajectory of regional economies. This research program includes broadband infrastructure deployment policy issues, as well as the impacts of broadband on business location. Recently, Dr. Mack's work is focused on understanding entrepreneurial ecosystems, water affordability, and spatial data uncertainty. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Liz.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This topic is, the title of my presentation is pretty vague, so I'm going to go on to the next slide, which kind of gets into, I actually can't move my slide at all. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, I can't move my screen at all.
Okay, do you want to put it in just your regular mode then?
Yeah, because it's not advancing anything.
Did you try clicking on the PowerPoint and then advancing when it was in presentation mode?
I don't know, let me see. I'll have to take two here in a second. Share screen. I'll try just sharing the PowerPoint.
And the arrow might work even though the normal clicking on it won't work.
There we go. Okay.
Success.
All right. So a little bit more details about specifically what this particular portion of U1 was doing. We're trying to look at the cost of water services and its impact on households as well as regional economies. And to do this, there were 4 project objectives. So number 1, we wanted to look at water price trends, and we also looked at associated affordability implications of these water price trends. Number 2, we looked at the economic impacts of changing consumer expenditures on water. And so we have a piece that I'll talk about in a minute that looks at how consumers may respond to rising water prices. Number 3, through expenditure cascades, which refers to group behavior in consumer expenses, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, there might be regional economic implications of how consumers change their spending behavior in response to changing water prices. And then lastly, I'll talk about an area of focus right now, which is to put together a database of water prices, past, present, and then this will also help people perhaps generate some forecasts of what future prices will look like. All right, so some partnerships here. One of the pieces I'll be talking about today was written in conjunction with the Philadelphia Water Department, the Philadelphia Law Department, and the Philadelphia Department of Revenue. So thanks to all of those women for their participation in that piece. We the People of Detroit has also been very supportive of work as it comes out. They've invited us to speak on this topic, and they've also shared results of this thrust research activity. So thank you to them and Monica Lewis-Patrick for their continued support and also the important work that they do in Detroit. So you all probably saw this map. This was published in +1 at the very beginning of the project. But the goal of this particular piece was to do basically a vulnerability assessment of how affordable water prices are for consumers across the United States. And basically what we found from this analysis We looked back historically, and since 2010, water rates in many large cities in the US have gone up about 41%. On average, it's about 6% if we consider a broader swath of cities. But since 2014, several cities were experiencing pretty large rate increases. And I give you some examples here for Austin, Chicago, and San Francisco. Much higher than inflation. So some of the key findings from this piece, we divided census tracts in this analysis into two categories. Those are at high risk, which means that it's really difficult, it's potentially very difficult for consumers in these areas right now to afford water prices at their current levels. And then we also said, well, based on the information I just showed you on the last slide, if water prices go up about 6%, to what extent are people at risk for not being able to afford water in the future? So both of these high risk and at-risk tracks, all right, so current and future affordability issues were in urban areas. So this is a distinctly sort of urban phenomenon. On the map I showed you, this highlighted pockets of water poverty. So these are low income areas in downtowns of Detroit, Michigan, downtown Phoenix, Arizona, and also Philadelphia, where people are very likely struggling to pay their water bills. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the solutions to this that from Philadelphia's perspective. On top of this, we also analyzed the characteristics of census tracts where there are likely affordability issues, and we found that there are compounding issues in terms of high rates of unemployment, presence of populations without health insurance coverage, and also presence of people that rely on food stamps and public assistance. So aside from potentially not being able to pay for their water services, they also face a lot of other economic pressures at the household level. So based on this, we said, well, this is sort of a vulnerability assessment, but how might we begin to understand what consumers might do to cope with rising water prices? And I have a conceptual framework here from a paper that was led by one of my graduate students, Laura Medwood, and you can find that in International Regional Science Review. The citation is provided for you at the bottom. But basically, it's a framework for thinking about how increased costs in water provision are passed on to consumers. So on the left-hand side here, we list some of the pressures on urban water providers in terms of dealing with the cost of maintaining and upgrading aging infrastructure. They might also need to deploy new infrastructure due to rapid urbanization, so to reach new homes and new construction sites. And then providers are also dealing with climate change. So how can they mitigate combined sewer overflows? How do they grapple with flooding challenges? Do they need to put in green infrastructure, new hard infrastructure to deal with these challenges? And also there are costs associated with that. And so all of those items there have cost implications. And so typically, largely there are not very many subsidies. There used to be more federal subsidies for water provision. Those have declined over time. We'll see what happens with the infrastructure proposals that are on the table right now. But to this point, subsidies for water providers have declined. So what this basically means is that a lot of these costs are passed on to consumers. And this can be done via increasing the fixed components of people's bills, the variable costs of their bills, or both. And I'll talk about our water rate database. And what it really reveals is that the manner in which customers are billed varies tremendously from provider to provider, from metropolitan area to metropolitan area. And many times the structure of these bills are quite complex and difficult for people to understand. That said, consumers get a bill for their water, and they look at this and they make budget decisions. They make choices also about how much water they are going to consume. But we are going to assume in this study that their water consumption remains constant in the short run. They might in the long run make other changes or adopt water saving appliances. But in the short run, we assume that their consumption remains constant. And so what this means is they have to figure out a way to deal with rising costs of water services. So in this paper, we're going to focus on how they might change purchasing behavior to save money and other areas of their household budget to cope with rising water prices. So here's some information We took data from a household survey from over 9,000 consumers that was conducted in conjunction with Sharon Harlan, and she'll talk about that when she talks about some of the work from Thrust Seed in a few months from now. But based on that survey, we actually asked people how they would respond. Would they increase their spending or decrease their spending, not change their spending, or they just simply are no change at all, or wouldn't be able to afford particular budget items given various water price increases. And you can see what those are here. All right, and we talk about, if you're interested in how we came up with those numbers, the details are in the paper. But based on this, you can see the types of items that they were likely to cut back on, wouldn't be able to afford. Okay, and we've divided them into essential goods and less essential goods. So examples of essential goods are groceries, doctor visits, drugs, and less essential goods, which is FAFH, stands for food away from home. And so a key takeaway point here is that you see people cutting back on less essential goods, more so than essential goods. And in terms of saying they wouldn't be able to afford things, you see more people saying that they would not be able to afford less essential goods. So this tells us that if people are going to make changes in their budget, it would be in items here that are less essential. So if you're a less essential business owner, this could not be good for you. Respondents did say, however, that if prices increased enough, they would reduce spending or not be able to afford important essential goods like healthcare, heating, and prescription medicine. So this is not a good sign. But really, if we were to take this is sort of a scenario-based approach to this, where we give people various scenarios of water price increases. It would be even better if we could get data on both the actual prices of water that these consumers were spending and also consumer uses of water. So I'll talk about some policy implications of this Thrust work at the end of this presentation. So we said, all right, we do see some trends in how consumers might respond to water prices. We refer to commonalities in or trends in consumer purchasing behavior as expenditure cascades. We've also seen this in times of recession or even the COVID-19 pandemic, where you do see trends in people buying or not buying particular types of goods and services. And so we actually uncovered something similar with respect to responses to water costs. And so what you can do is take the household budget items that I indicated from the prior slide, and you can plug them into an input-output tables. And what this does is it actually tells you what households buy from other sectors in the economy. And so you can decrease the amount of money that households buy in some sectors and increase it in others, and via this approach get some sense of the regional economic impacts or the wider implications of these changes in household spending behaviors. So we did an assessment of what this might look like, focusing on the Phoenix metropolitan area, and I have provided the citation there for you if you want to read more details. But this is a way that we would connect information from individual consumers to regional models to understand the broader implications. And in this paper, we looked at regional income, job losses, and also productivity. So what does this mean for utility? Because one of the things we're supposed to be talking about today are some of the policy implications. So this means that water is probably unaffordable for many Americans, that consumers are also likely to change spending behavior if we see water prices continue to increase. We know that there are some regional impacts, potential regional impacts associated with this. So what can utilities do about this problem? We published 2 more papers, and I'm going to talk about those that talk about consumer perceptions, but also some actual programs highlighting Philadelphia's tiered assistance program. So the first study, it's Laura Medwood's dissertation, which is in progress. She's almost done. Looked at perceptions of water bill fairness. And to do this, we used the similar data, our household survey data, which contains information from about 9,250 respondents between December 2017 and March of 2018. And this covers our UWIN regions and some of our SRN institutions as well. And so this map gives you a sense of some of the participating metropolitan areas in this survey. What we found, so there's a question on the survey that asked people, do you think the price that you pay for water is fair or unfair? And we plugged this into a logistic regression model to indicate where we modeled the likelihood that people indicated that their bill was unfair as a function of respondent characteristics. And what we found was that low-income households and minorities were likely to think that their water bills were unfair. We also found that there were regional variations in the perception of fairness. So participants in Southeast Michigan, which covers the Flint and Detroit areas, were more likely to think that their water bills were unfair. Participants in the Boston, sort of New York areas were less likely to think that their water bills were unfair. So the result for Michigan, we thought, might be due to higher visibility of water issues in the news. So obviously we had the Flint water crisis. People in Flint still pay a lot of money for water that is not very good on balance. And Detroit has also been on the news, unfortunately, for a lot of water shutoffs. And so we thought that this might have, that perceptions of fairness and participants' responses in the survey might have been impacted by the visibility of these two places in the news. From a policy perspective, in terms of thinking about what we can actually do, frequency of bill payment was important. And this is something that comes up on the literature about affordability and how to help households, how to make water more affordable for households from a utility perspective. And so we found that people that were billed either monthly or annually were more likely to think that their bills were fair. People that were billed quarterly were more likely to think that their bills were unfair. So we thought that the monthly item might be, you're getting something in the mail fairly frequently, you know what to expect on a month-to-month basis. But also if you break the annual cost of water down on a monthly basis, that sticker shock is a little bit less. From an annual perspective, people could also budget annually, and so they might not be as shocked by a larger one-time annual bill and think of it in the context of maybe other semi-annual or annual household expenses. But the quarterly piece might be sticker shock because it is a larger bill than their monthly bill, and it comes at less of a frequency. So it's a little bit more difficult to budget on a quarterly basis. So for utility providers out there, monthly or annual was more likely to impact or positively impact people's perceptions of fairness. The other thing that we found was that bill payment assistance. So people that indicated that some sort of assistance was available from their provider were less likely to think that the price that they paid for water was unfair. So again, we'll talk about customer assistance programs when we get to Philadelphia in a moment here, but offering some sort of assistance to customers and making them aware of that assistance is also something that utilities can do to positively affect consumer perceptions of the services that they offer. Okay. So thinking along the lines of solutions, I'm going to focus on the case of the Philadelphia Water Department. And I want to talk a little bit just about customer assistance programs in general. Customer assistance programs are one strategy, as I mentioned, that utilities can take to help people afford their bills. So this could be sort of a senior discount, a low-income discount, some sort of subsidy or discount for adopting water-saving appliances. But irrespective of the variety, and there are several of these programs, these are not income-based bills. So you still run into the issue of people that make less money might be more challenged when it comes to making water payments. So in that sense, income-based billing differs from your traditional customer assistance program because bills are structured so that they are affordable for customers at the outset, meaning that they're actually benchmarked to customers' level of income. So this is something that several metropolitan areas, I believe this has also been implemented in Baltimore by this point, have debated implementing. And in the paper, I have it, the citation here listed for you. There are actually some legal barriers to the types of customer assistance programs that utilities can offer consumers. So there are some restrictions in that sense. And this is something that the city of Philadelphia had to deal with first before they decided to move forward with income-based billing. And the name of their income-based billing program is the Tiered Assistance Program. And what it does is it actually structures bills for water, wastewater, and stormwater services to enrollees' income. So they get something that's affordable based on their particular income level. And so in the citation I have listed at the bottom there, we actually wrote a paper that describes the process for rolling out this program. And then also in the paper, we assessed the impact of the program on customers and what they thought, and also what this means for utility revenues. So here are just some snapshots of what a consumer bill might look like. The one on the right is someone enrolled in the tiered assistance program, and the one on the left is someone that is not yet enrolled in the tiered assistance program. And so obviously there's a big difference in the please pay amount if you look at the right compared to the left. Another big difference here is that's notable about the program is the late payment penalties. So there are no late payment penalties here if you're enrolled in TAP, and there are late payment penalties if you are a normal customer program or customer of Philadelphia Water. The other items that are different here is the please pay amount. Here it's just the current amount of your bill, and here it's the all past due, your current balance or your current bill for that month, and then all past due amounts. And so what the tiered assistance program does is it suspends payment. People are not required to make payments based on your particular income. And they actually had to develop bills to enroll in TAP, but then also calculate individual bills that are paid to each customer's income. While you're enrolled in the program, you're not required to pay past due amounts. Interest does still accrue while you are on past due amounts while you're enrolled in the program. But if you are enrolled in the program for enough time, then that your past due balance is forgiven and you're not required to pay it anymore. Okay. Before I get into the last steps of what we're doing here, Philadelphia Water, at the time we wrote this paper, had not yet, they had received favorable customer reviews in the sense that they had enrolled more people in TAP than they had in all customer assistance programs that they offered previously. Customers that were enrolled in TAP felt that it did help them make their water bill payments on time and in full. They had not yet assessed the impacts of what forgiving arrearages on past due balances would be for the revenues of the water utilities. So that is something that is still pending and sort of an open question at this point in time. Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and this came up in the first study, the +1 study that looked at sort of a vulnerability assessment to affordability issues nationwide, is to collect data on water prices. And at the time, I guess it was over 6 years ago that we started thinking about this project. At this point, we thought, well, clearly there will just be a database that we can go to and we will find water or information about water prices and wastewater prices. And we can analyze this for trends and make forecasts about what's going on with future trends. And boy, were we wrong. There is no database. There is a survey that's done of large utilities from the American Water Works Association, the AWWA, but it does not cover all utilities across the United States. And so it's a sample of utilities that choose to participate at any point in time. And if you actually look at the number of providers that bill consumers for their water services, so if you were to look on your water bill and see the name of the entity that bills you for your water services, there are quite a few within metropolitan areas. So I know in Detroit, there are about 112 utilities that provide water and wastewater services to customers and that are considered end users. So we're not, or end suppliers. So we're not talking about wholesalers here, but the entities that actually bill customers for services. So this has been a Moby Dick-like tale to put together all of this information, but we're nearly done in the sense that we have the information and we're checking it for quality controls. But here's a little bit about what the database looks like. Up top here, we have the participating UN regions, so Atlanta, Baltimore, Detroit, Miami, Phoenix, and Portland. We have water rates for drinking water and also wastewater services. We haven't collected information for stormwater. And we've looked at 2010, 2015, and 2017. From the rate information, we're able to see the rate structure, whether it's uniform, so a fixed unit cost, fixed cost per unit of water, I should say. If it's increasing block, so the more water you consume, the more you pay per unit, or decreasing block, which is the more you use, the less you pay per unit of water. So it's sort of an economies of scale way of pricing water for consumers. And then we did is try to calculate bills, which is, it's more accurate to say the cost of water based on the information that we have for different usage levels. That is a debate in the affordability literature in the sense of, people might not be able to afford water at 10,000 gallons of water consumed per month, but what does it look like for 4,000 gallons of water consumed per month? So with that in mind, we're trying to provide costs of water services for varied usage levels. And I have 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and those are in thousands of gallons. So you can see what it looks like across all those dimensions. And then we tried to break out bills in terms of their fixed and variable components. In the affordability literature, people talk about regressive rate structures, and regressive rate structures would be where a high proportion of people's bills are a fixed component, meaning there's nothing they can do from a consumption standpoint to affect the level, to affect the price of water that they're paying. So it's argued in the affordability literature that it's better to send people signals in terms of via prices. So an increasing block structure would encourage, accomplish mutually beneficial goals of encouraging water conservation, but also giving people an incentive, which gives people incentive to not use as much water, but it also reduces the cost of their bill if they're not using as much water. So the ability to break things out in terms of fixed and variable components is important. And we're also going to have shape files associated with this, so be able to map it and actually put some census data together with it to get some sense of who is paying what types of water costs. But some lessons, many lessons have been learned, and I'll kind of, I have this slide and then I have one final slide to close. But we've learned many lessons in putting together this database. One of them is that there's a lot of variability in the record keeping by utilities of their water rates. So several do not keep information posted online, and you actually have to call and try and get someone to fax you or email a rate sheet. We even, in Detroit at least, showed up at some of the utilities and asked for a paper copy of the rates. We did find out via this process, though, that many utilities do not keep historical rate records. So finding information from 2010 was super difficult. They had information from the previous or maybe the previous 2 years, but going back in time was a lot more challenging. We also tried to call to make inquiries about rate sheets, but depending on who you talk to, you would get inconsistent information in terms of when rates were enacted or what different components of we found online, benchmarking purposes only. So we were trying to, basically the database that we want to share is going to give you the monthly cost of water. It's going to be an approximation, I should say, of the monthly cost of water frequency of each provider, whether that was quarterly, monthly, or annually. So sometimes we saw multiple billing frequencies listed on a rate sheet, and we'd call for clarification, and they would say, oh, it says quarterly on there, but our billing frequency isn't really quarterly, it's monthly. We just constructed this as a way of benchmarking our rates to other utilities in the area that bill on a quarterly basis, which was important to know. It's also really difficult to get information about changes in fees that they are reporting. So let's say that they wanted to, this came out a lot with debt service charges. Sometimes that was included in the fixed cost of the bill in prior years, and sometimes it was broken out explicitly. And so it was really difficult to understand if a debt service charge had been implemented to pay for debt for improvements, for capital maintenance improvements, for example, if that was a new charge or if it was an existing charge and just listed differently on the bill. So we would caution people in using this data about looking at comparing rates over time, because there are some of these inconsistencies in terms of fee reporting. If possible, you can go back and read the minutes of rate hearing meetings if they are available, to try and flesh out when particular types of fees were implemented to pay for different aspects of services. But if these aren't available, then obviously it's hard to say when exactly they were initiated. So based on our experience with the project thus far, and I just want to take some time to say thank you to all the people on UN for their participation. It's been a really good group to work with. Thanks to the people at Philadelphia Water. Yeah, it's been a really positive experience. So based on A12's experiences, we recommend the following 4 items for policymakers. We think it's necessary to establish a dashboard for utilities to report water and wastewater rates and fees. The University of North Carolina does have a start on this, and in the sense that they do have coverage for some places, but there's a lot of work to be done in terms of expanding what they have done to other parts of the United States. But a second key thing to keep in mind is that it would be good to establish reporting guidelines to enhance the comparability of water costs. I talked about some of the issues in terms of understanding the billing frequency and also any changes in fees and when they were implemented. So if a dashboard that's more comprehensive is put into place, it would need to come with really stringent reporting guidelines so that you get comparable data across utilities. We're also missing a lot of information about the price, not only about the prices that people pay for water, but the consequences of not paying for water in terms of water shutoffs. In Detroit, we tried to FOIA information to get the counts of shutoffs per year, since it's one of the places where it's happened most prodigiously, and our FOIA request was ignored and we never received the information. So in theory, people are supposed to provide you with this information if FOIA'd, but that does not always happen. So it'd be nice to get some sense of who is not paying for water and how many people are affected. But information there is really difficult to get and also not national in coverage. I would also put a sub-bullet point under number 3 as well, or as a separate item even, in the sense that we need a better understanding of how much water people are actually consuming. There are some attempts to report this, and NASDAQ talked a little bit about some of this in his presentation from the USGS, but there's a lot of variability in how much water people consume, also based on their income levels regionally. So it'd be really nice to have higher resolution information about how much water people are consuming and how this is changing over time. And then for utilities that are considering implementing creative customer assistance program like TAP in Philadelphia, this certainly requires a review of legal restrictions that might prevent the implementation of particular types of programs. And we talk about some of those barriers. Martha Davis from Northeastern is an attorney, and she helped write that section of the paper, and she noted some of the barriers to the implementation of particular types of customer assistance programs nationwide. So here are some references. I'll leave that up for just a minute. If anybody wants to take a screenshot or make a note of this. I do want to let everybody know that we got word yesterday that our paper in JAWRA received the William R. Bogus Award for the best paper published in the journal in 2020. So that was a really nice note to get yesterday. So with that, I just want to again thank the National Science Foundation for their financial support of this work. And this is my last slide, and I will take questions or comments at this time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Liz. Congratulations. That's really exciting news and very timely given, your webinar today. So at this point, I'd like to open it up. I see Obi's on and Glenn's on. Do either of you have any comments on the research that was just presented? Go ahead, Glenn.
Hi, folks. Hi, Liz. Good to hear from you. I wanted to go to the regional analysis. I would understand that fundamentally the regional analysis assumed that the increase in water rates, that money was removed from the regional economy. So, but
it doesn't.
So if that additional, that increment in rate, for example, resulted in additional hiring of local contractors or additional staff and so forth, would that money stay in the economy? So it's just a reallocation.
Yeah, it is a reallocation. So it's definitely you could argue sort of a loss for households, and it gets reallocated elsewhere. And the tables don't actually do a very good job of providing detail about, so this is sort of one of the discussion items in the paper. IO models don't actually provide a lot of resolution about how water providers are using that money. So if they're using it for debt service, for example, then that wouldn't necessarily create jobs. If they're using it, as you indicate, for improvements or operations and maintenance, then yes, it would create jobs. So that, it's potentially a useful tool, but you might have to get more information from the individual providers themselves before saying, there's a net gain, net loss. And so in that sense, the way the data are right now is not as helpful as it could be without modification.
Yeah. Thanks.
Obi, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question. Interesting presentation. I was curious, with the rate structures, sometimes the actual usage decreases. And I was wondering, maybe I missed that, if you looked at the per capita rate or some of the other quantities as a function of rate structure. And a follow-up question is, a lot of utilities, they don't like, selling less amount of water. Their revenue is less, similar to Glenn's question. Are you looking at those two issues? How does the rate structure affect the usage? And then how does it affect the utility income?
We actually have no information on, so we have the rates that people pay, but we have no information about how much consumers are actually using. So that's a big hole in our knowledge in the water community, but I think it's really important because it would help us answer a lot of the questions in terms of how responsive are people to various, there have been some case studies, how responsive are consumers to various pricing strategies? Do they understand their bills? Is this understanding them reflected in their behavior? It's really hard to answer that right now because it's super challenging to even get the price information. And if you want to pair that with the usage, forget about it. I mean, you would have to work very closely. I know Denver Water has done a really good job with Mazdek's people, but unless you have a partner like that, it's going to be super challenging. Particularly, we're striving for multi-region coverage, across regions. You would spend all of your time just trying to get the data. And then, yeah, that is a problem that I've thought a lot about in terms of it's hard.
Revenue for the utilities.
Yeah, and also that it's something that comes up with Philadelphia's the long-term view of TAP in Philadelphia. What does this mean for utilities from a revenue standpoint?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's actually something we've seen in the news. People say, you're encouraging me to conserve water, so I use less water, but my rates go up, and it's because there's that fixed component that you have to recover just to maintain basic service levels. So I think that's something that, well, obviously, we're seeing a lot of the brunt of climate change right now, but as people maybe think about this and, conservation takes place at broader scales, how do you deal with capturing revenue so you can ensure service and all of these issues? I don't think we've really
Mhm.
crossed that bridge yet.
Yeah, just a follow-up. In South Florida, the regional agencies like the Water Management District collect the actual usage, and they have shown that the per capita use rate has actually gone down in the last 5-10 years.
Mhm.
And that is good because Floridians love water and they use treated water to irrigate lawns. But then the question came up, is that because of the conservation measures, or is that because of the economy? Is it related to economy, for example? It's kind of hard to differentiate in some cases. I was curious if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, we thought about that, when I put up that conceptual framework. There are two things that people can do to affect their water levels. They can do nothing and consume the same amount they have before and reduce spending on other items. So maybe we don't get that magazine every month, or maybe we don't go to the movies, or they can say, well, we're going to cut back on how much water we use, and that will reduce our water bill.
Mhm.
We gave people scenarios to understand what their behavior was, but we didn't ask them if they would also cut back on water. But yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of consumer behavior, trying to match up very, like scenario-based analyses with high resolution information on water prices and also water use. I mean, if we had all that information, I think a lot of these things that we like to talk about would be answered for us.
Part of the long-term trend is just simply because of what we build into our houses and so forth use water more efficiently.
Yep.
So appliances and fixtures and all those sorts of things. So now if you're looking at the water use for a new development versus the average that you have, that new development will be much less than the corresponding style of development, just because of so that gets mixed into the long-term trends. It's pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, I consider that to be a part of the water conservation measure. Building more efficient utility. I mean,
absolutely.
Household,
you'd have to work to buy appliances that use a lot of water. They just aren't in the marketplace anymore.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just in toilets alone, I think the savings was double. I think old toilets, it was like 5 to 10 gallons per flush. And then around 1980, they changed that. Now you're looking at like 2 gallons per flush. So substantial savings just right there. Yeah.
Elizabeth, wanted to ask, I noticed you had a pretty long list of co-authors on that paper about Philadelphia. I was wondering if any of the Philadelphia stakeholders actually participated in that publication.
What do you mean? So
as
Philadelphia.
authors.
Yes. Mark Camerata referred me to Joanne Dom, who worked with Philadelphia Water, and so she participated. But I can go back. Well, basically everybody but myself and Sarah Race was a stakeholder in that sense, so that they were from the Philadelphia Department of Water, the Philadelphia Department of Revenue, the Law Service. So they were really helpful, and also Martha Davis. But the other people from Revenue, Law, and Philadelphia Water were really helpful in getting us representative customer bills. They got us minutes from meetings about rate hearings, what people thought about the implementation of TAP. They got us notes about process, everything from they had to rework their entire computer database to deal with intake of applications, calculation of unique bills. So we give some sense of all the steps involved in the paper because it was quite complex and took a lot of planning on their part, but we wouldn't have had access to that sort of information without their help. So yeah, they were really instrumental in
That's excellent. I mean, that's a great example for you in terms of a success there.
I wonder if maybe developing some type of little case study, like success story, like essentially kind of a more condensed version of that paper might be a fruitful product.
Yeah, I'd like to do something to thank them, aside from randomly show up at their office, which they might not appreciate. So I wanted to email Mark about the award. Just because I think it is, I mean, they're a very forward-thinking utility in a lot of ways. I think we've also talked about them with green infrastructure, but it would be great to find some way to showcase the work that they're doing as a positive representative of utilities out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been so many other spin-off and complementary projects with our group at CSU with PWD. So it's a really valuable relationship that is continued, and we hope to continue. So. Great. Well, any other questions for Liz? Haven't seen anything pop up in the chat. So thanks for your time today, everybody. I will get this posted, and we hope to see you all next week for Forest presentation. So thanks for your time. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.